Hey all, today we are going to talk about slope of lines, and we're going to talk specifically about parallel lines and perpendicular lines and the relationship between their slopes. So there's a couple ways that we can find slope, and the first way would be if we have a graph of a line. And so if you remember from algebra, slope is essentially the slantiness of the line. We have a lot of ways to represent slope. One way we can say the rise over the run. So rise up and down, run left and right. Oops, not rise over rise over run. And so what you might have done is count. So I like to count from the point I have on the left, and I will count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then over 1, 2, 3, 4. So I went down 5 and over 4. And since I went down 5, I would say negative 5. And so the slope of this line is negative 5 over 4. It's also important to note whenever our line goes down to the right, it's going to be negative, and there it was negative. If we don't have a graph and we just have points, we can still find the slope. And here's a good time to remind you that slope, we use the symbol m for slope. And so if we just have points, we can find the slope m by subtracting the y's and dividing by subtracting the x's. And we'll leave it in fraction form. So if I would have found the coordinates in this picture, I could have subtracted the y's and got negative 5, subtracted the x's and got 4, and arrived at the same slope. So let's do that for these 2 points. If I subtract the y's, I'm going to subtract 0 minus negative 19. Y is the second number in the parentheses, remember. And then the x's are negative 12 minus 17. And notice that I started with the same point each time. So my first number came from the left point here, and so the first number on the bottom comes from the left point. And so when I finish that subtraction, I get the slope to be negative 19 over 29. And so that line would be down to the right with this slope. So let's try a couple more. For this one, if I start here, I go up 1 to the right 1. So that means my slope is 1 over 1. The line goes up to the right, so it's supposed to be positive. And so I can leave it like this. I could also just call it 1 if I wanted to. For my points, I'm going to subtract the y's and then subtract the x's. So my y's were negative 15 and positive 16. And then my x's were 20 and 14. And when I do those subtractions, I get negative 31 over 6. So I want you to pause right here, and for the line on the left, I want you to find its slope, and the points on the right, I want you to find the slope between those 2 points. So when I look at my graph, I should get a positive slope because it's going up to the right, so I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my slope is going to be 7 over 5. Here I'm going to use the formula. I'm going to subtract my y's, negative 2 minus 11, and subtract my x's, negative 14 minus negative 8. Be careful with the signs. And so I get negative 13 over negative 6. And then whenever they're both negative, that just means that that slope should actually be positive 13 over 6. So now that we can find slope, let's talk about how to compare slopes of two lines that are parallel. And just a refresher here that parallel lines are two lines that will never ever cross. So the relationship that parallel lines have is that their slopes are the same. So if I have two lines that have the same slope, that means they're never going to cross. They're slanted the same way, and so they'll never cross. So this line, I believe we already found the slope, is -5/4. So if I draw any other line, go down 5, to the right 4, and if I create a line, those two lines will have the same slope. They're slanted the same. That makes them parallel. And if we extended both of these lines on forever and ever and ever, they would never, ever cross. So if I want to find the slope of a line parallel to a line that I'm given, then I can just find the slope of that line, and the slope of the parallel line will be the same. And so whenever we have equations of lines in this form, all I need to do is look at the number in front of x, and that's the slope of that line. So this line, y = 3x + 1, has the slope 3, and therefore any line that's parallel to it is also going to have a slope of 3. Same thing here. I have this line has 3/5 in front of x, so the slope of this line is 3/5. And therefore, any line parallel to it is going to have a slope of 3/5. They're always going to be the same. If two lines are parallel, their slopes will be the same. Perpendicular lines are different from parallel lines in that they cross, and specifically they cross to form right angles. So if I want to look at their slopes, there's two things that perpendicular lines have for their slopes. One is that they'll have opposite signs. So this line here is going to have a negative slope, so its perpendicular line is going to have a positive slope. And also the fractions that describe the slopes are going to be flipped from one another. So this line had a slope of -5/4. And so the slope of the perpendicular line, we're going to change its sign to be positive, and we're going to flip the fraction to be 4/5. So any line I draw with the slope of 4/5 is going to be perpendicular to this line. So let's do that. I'll put a point there, and I'll go up 4/5. And if I draw a line there, let me fix that line a little. It should look like these two lines make right angles. They definitely intersect because they cross, and they make right angles. So they are perpendicular. So I can go grab the slopes of these lines again. These are the same lines that we used for parallel lines. So the first one had a slope of 3. The second one a slope of 3/5. So now if I want to know the slope of any line perpendicular, I change the sign and I flip the fraction. Well, it's helpful to know that if I don't have a fraction to begin with, I can just divide by 1. So my new slope is -1/3. Changed its sign to be negative and flip the fraction to be 1/3. Here I'm going to flip the fraction over to be 5/3, and I'm going to make it negative. So go ahead and pause here. I want you to find the slope of this line, find the slope of a line parallel, and then a slope of the line perpendicular. So the slope of my line here is 7/4. It's just the number in front of x. And so the parallel lines are going to have the same exact slope, 7/4. Perpendicular lines are going to have the opposite sign, and the fraction is going to flip to 4/7. So -4/7. So I have 3 questions for you here to answer at the end of this video. I want you to find the slope of the line, find the slope of any line parallel to it, and then find the slope of any line perpendicular to it.